As he stands looking out of the small cell window, he can't help himself from staring down at the small fence holding them inside the prison. He was a tall old man with long white hair and a beaten body. His name was Alfred Mohan, but he'd go by Al. He would sit in his cell for consecutive days, talking out loud to himself. Since he was in Vietnam, he's not spoken one word to another person. He sees things in his mind, almost like imaginary people, which he speaks and converses with. He has been in prison since the day he came back from Vietnam. When he was at war, he was captured by the Viet Cong and put in a POW camp. When he was there, he was savagely beaten and starved. He spent 9 months in one of these camps. He was never the same when he came out. Before the war, he was a kind, outgoing guy who would joke around, but ever since he got out of the camp, he has been scarred for life. He no longer acts like a human. He's almost like a broken machine who's been neglected and dusty in a corner. He can no longer function and has been forgotten by the outside world. Once he came back to Kate Uptown, he couldn't live with the horrors and nightmares he faced. People would look at him as the crazy war veteran who talked to himself and saw things. The town's people grew scared of his odd behavior and tried to exile him into a local insane asylum. But since the town is so isolated, their only hope was to send him to the local jail to keep him away from normal life. He spent every day in his cell like he is still in Vietnam. He believes he is still in that POW camp. He cries at night, screaming for help, but no one helps. 20 years earlier, back in Vietnam, he was a good lieutenant in the army. One day, when he was on a patrol, his entire unit was surprise attacked by a small unit of Viet Cong. All his men he was in charge of were killed. He was the only survivor. He was only wounded by shrapnel, which tore through the left side of his face. The scars weren't painful to him. The only thing that bothered him was the fact that he only wanted to survive. He was taken to a nearby camp, where he was in a small 5 by 10 cell. The cell was dark and soggy. The stench of the camp was so strong, it burnt your nostrils. He had one small window in his cell. It looked over the beautiful hills and rice paddies of Vietnam. It was the only escape he had from the horrors inside. It was his vantage point on life. One day, while the man was sleeping in his cell, he heard the sound of gunfire close by. He heard yelling in Vietnamese and the sound of running men. Once, he noticed the sound of American voices. He screamed for help. As the men came towards, he fell to his feet crying of joy. As they opened his cell, they were attacked by the guards of the camp. Both of the men were killed, but Al ran for the exit. As he ran down the hallway, he came across a guard who had a knife in his hand. He fought the man hand to hand for a long time until the knife fell from the guard's hand. He grabbed a hold of the knife and stuck it into the back of the guard, and the blood dripped down his hands and the lifeless body fell beneath his feet. The guards and the inmates have no relationship or contact with Al. One day, an inmate who was in the jail for murder came up and tried to speak with him. "Hello," the inmate said. There was no response from Al, until he made a motion with his hands, almost as if he was trying to reach out and grab something. "Are you okay?" said the inmate. Al still had no response. The man tried to walk into Al's cell to attempt to speak with him. As he got close, Al sprung from his bed like a frog's tongue and grabbed the inmate by the neck. The man screamed of terror, for he didn't know what to think. He really believed that Al could kill him in this moment. The next thing he noticed was the grip from Al's hand begin to loosen up. Al dropped to his feet and began to cry. "I'm sorry," said Al in anguish. "You know, it's been a while since I've talked to someone." "Ever since the war, I haven't been able to think normally," spoke Al. As the inmate began to come closer and sit down, Al broke out into tears once again and hugged the inmate in a strong embrace. The simple fact of someone coming up and attempting to talk to him made Al very emotional. Ever since he got back from the war, people were scared of his odd behavior, and the large scar on his face was curved down his cheek like a snake. Just seeing the scar made some people turn away. The immense joy that Al was experiencing was above anything he has ever experienced. This moment was the first time Al had spoken to somebody in reality since the war. "I don't know what to say," said Al. The simple idea of conversing felt very unnatural and ambiguous to Al. As they began to converse, Al spoke about his experiences in the war. This was the first time he ever spoke to somebody about the war, other than the people in his mind. The feeling of talking to a real person was one of the most wonderful experiences he has ever had. The inmate was very interested in the stories Al told about the war. He began to ask questions, and Al was always ready to answer them. They began to have daily conversations as the year went on. It wasn't until December of that year when the inmate who Al had become so close with was suddenly transferred to another jail. This put Al back in a state of depression, for the one thing he looked forward to in his days was gone. He had no one to talk to anymore except the people he created in his mind.